Hi there, I'm Tony Lee, and this is Hot Flasher, your daily menopause podcast that serves up fresh news, research, and wellness tips. I've built a daily news pipeline to find the latest on women's health and menopause research. Allow me to introduce my co-host Nikki, who handles the headlines. Take it away, Nikki.
Thanks, Tony. We've got a good one today. 3 papers published in the last 48 hours, and they happen to cover a lot of ground together. Let's get into it. The first one dropped today on PubMed, and the title is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Flaxseed and Linusorb synergistically ameliorate menopausal symptoms through non-hormonal activation of estrogen receptors and suppression of osteoclastogenesis. That is a sentence. So let's break down what's actually being claimed here, because I think it's worth taking seriously and worth being careful about at the same time. Flaxseed has been in the phytoestrogen conversation for years. It's one of the richest dietary sources of lignans, which are plant compounds that your gut bacteria can convert into enterolignans, specifically enterodiol and enterolactone. And those compounds have weak estrogen-like activity in the body. The key word there is weak. They bind to estrogen receptors, but they're not estrogen, and the effect is not equivalent. That distinction matters a lot when someone is deciding whether to swap their HRT for a tablespoon of ground flax. What this new study adds is Linusorb, a bioactive component derived from flaxseed oil, specifically from its lipid fraction. And the claim is that when you combine flaxseed lignans with Linusorb, you get a synergistic effect. Together, they appear to activate estrogen receptors through a non-hormonal pathway and simultaneously suppress osteoclastogenesis, which is the process by which your body breaks down bone. That second part, the bone piece, is the part I find genuinely interesting, because bone loss is one of the real clinically significant consequences of estrogen decline, and it's one of the harder things to address without pharmacological intervention. Now, here's what I want you to hold on to before anyone screenshots this study and posts it as proof that flaxseed is the new HRT. This is published August 12th, or 12th, 2026. The lead author is Zhang W.I. I don't yet have full access to the methods section, but the research category and the language of the abstract suggest this is preclinical or early mechanistic work, meaning we are likely talking about cell studies or animal models, not a randomized controlled trial in perimenopausal women. The jump from this compound activates estrogen receptors in a lab setting to women should take this for their hot flashes and bone density is not a small jump. It is a large, evidence-requiring jump that many wellness brands will make without blinking. There's also the equal question, which comes up every time we talk about phytoestrogens. About 30 to 50% of people, depending on the study, have gut microbiomes capable of converting plant lignans into equal, which is the form that appears to have the most meaningful estrogenic activity. If you're not an equal producer, and you may have no idea whether you are or aren't, the benefits of dietary phytoestrogens are likely much smaller. So even in a well-designed human trial, you'd expect to see a wide split in outcomes based on something women can't easily control or even know about themselves. None of that makes this study useless. Mechanistic research is how we figure out what's worth testing in humans. And if the bone suppression findings hold up in clinical trials, that could matter. Flaxseed is cheap, accessible, has a decent safety profile for most people, and if it turns out to genuinely support bone density, even modestly, that's worth knowing. I'm just not declaring victory in August 2026 based on a single paper with synergy in the title. The second paper out today is a very different kind of read, and I want to be clear that this one is a case report, a single clinical case, so it's not generating population level statistics. But it's the kind of clinical detail that I think is worth knowing. The paper from Basmajian K and colleagues documents a case of metastatic breast cancer that spread to the cervix and endometrium and presented in a way that looked clinically like a primary gynecologic malignancy, meaning the initial picture looks like the cancer started in the uterus or cervix. It didn't. It started in the breast and travelled there. Why does this matter for a menopause podcast? A few reasons. First, the symptoms that brought this patient in, abnormal uterine bleeding, gynecologic abnormalities, are symptoms that overlap heavily with perimenopause and early menopause. Irregular bleeding, spotting, changes in discharge, these are things that get attributed to hormonal fluctuation, often correctly, but sometimes not. Second, metastatic breast cancer spreading to gynecologic organs is rare, but it happens, and it can be missed if the clinical team isn't thinking about prior cancer history as a possible source. Third, and this is the part that applies broadly, any gynecologic symptom that is new, persistent, or feels different should get looked at. Not Googled, not waited out for 6 months, looked at. This is not a reason to panic every time your cycle is irregular in perimenopause. The vast majority of the time, irregular bleeding in this life stage is exactly what it looks like: hormonal fluctuation. But a case report like this is a useful reminder that it's probably just menopause is a clinical conclusion that still requires ruling other things out, not a reason to skip the appointment. If you have a history of breast cancer and you develop new gynecologic symptoms, that workup should probably include your oncology team, not just your gynecologist. That's worth knowing. The third paper from Moreno AR and colleagues, published yesterday, is a quality improvement project looking at how primary care clinics can get better at actually having menopause conversations with patients. And I have thoughts. The study found, and this is consistent with basically every piece of research in this space, that structured tools, checklists, and clinical prompts significantly increase the rate of menopause discussions happening in primary care appointments. When clinics implemented standardized intake questions about menopause symptoms, more patients had those conversations, which is good, obviously good. And also, the fact that we needed a quality improvement project to make this happen is its own data point. The average primary care appointment is somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. Menopause is a condition that spans sleep disruption, mood changes, joint pain, bone density loss, cardiovascular risk, genitourinary symptoms, cognitive changes, and sexual function. You cannot address that in a single appointment. And in many cases, you cannot even open the conversation in a meaningful way without the patient having already done significant work to name and describe what they're experiencing. The burden of that has historically fallen on the patient to come in prepared, to use the right words, to not get their concerns dismissed as anxiety or aging or stress. What this quality improvement project is doing, at its best, is shifting some of that burden back to the system. Asking, what if the clinic prompted the conversation instead of waiting for the patient to fight for it? That is a meaningful structural shift, even if it feels like a modest one. The research also points to something I think gets under-discussed. GP training on menopause is still genuinely inadequate in many medical education systems. Some studies have put the average menopause-specific training in medical school at under 2 hours over the course of an entire degree. 2 hours for a transition that affects roughly half the population for potentially a decade or more. A checklist in a waiting room can help, but it's not a substitute for a clinician who actually understands the range of what menopause looks like and what the current evidence says about managing it. The kind of evidence base that would actually inform those conversations, the clinical guidelines, the updated hormone therapy data, the bone density research, That's the kind of thing your doctor should be consulting on a tool like open evidence, not working from decade-old training. And some are, but the gap between what the evidence supports and what patients are actually being offered in primary care remains real. And a QI project in one clinic system, however well designed, is not closing it system-wide. What would close it is treating menopause medicine as the specialty adjacent discipline it actually is, not an afterthought in a general internal medicine appointment, but something that gets real time, real training, and real reimbursement. We're not there yet.
Thanks for listening to Hot Flasher. We're back tomorrow with more, so don't forget to subscribe. See you tomorrow.